Welcome to episode 70 of Contrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today we have a very special return guest on a last minute request to fill in for rescheduling, but I really think it'll be an interesting conversation to get into what's going on in the world, what's going on in markets, what's going on with commodities, and I think it'll be an interesting conversation as it always is. So, John, thanks for coming back.
Sure, happy to step in and pinch hit. No problem. I have plenty of time, so
Yeah.
looking forward
Well,
to it.
I hope semi-retired life is treating you well, but I figured we could lead off with what's going on in broader markets, and I kind of keep one eye on what's going on with like S&P and valuations, and I mean crypto treasury companies, all this other stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But what are your kind of thoughts on like the broad state of the market? What's going on with investor sentiment and speculative behavior? I know we kind of everyone has penciled in rate cuts for kind of the rest of this year, but what's your kind of view on the big picture for broad markets here?
Well, I mean, the U.S. markets are extremely overvalued just about by any historical comparison you want to make. And so I have not that much interest in buying things that I consider to be historically overvalued. The data is clear, the research is clear. If the more that you pay for these things, your 10-year forward returns are going to be lower. These are not outliers. You talk about sediment, you talk about these things. I'm 58 years old, so I was smack dab in it in the internet bubble. I remember that, the telecommunications and internet craze, late 90s. We didn't have the amount of social media we had then. We basically all we had was Yahoo message boards, and those were corny as hell. And I remember pointing out, they would have several billion dollar valuations for goofy companies like pets.com or drcoop.com. They had forget about cash flow and earnings. They had no revenue. And so they would be valued on eyeballs, how many people were looking at the site. And of course, would be justified. And I would bring up in some of these message boards, hey, this company doesn't have any sales or earnings or cash flow. It's all speculation. And people would, respond to me because they were so emotionally invested in this and they had so much FOMO and they're frothing at the mouth. They would threaten to kill me and rape my wife. And of course, I didn't take it seriously. People just say stuff. But eventually, I remember what I remember. I tell this story every time somebody asks me about this. I remember on CNBC, of course, they love that because that's what they're there to do is, pump this thing for advertisements for money management companies and stuff like that in Wall Street, because that's what Wall Street exists to do, gather assets under management, then cream off fees. But so that's their constituency. So they love bull markets. They love when stonks go up. There's no very few. They bring the, occasional foil in like Peter Schiff or that guy that they have, forget his name, in the CBOE or something. But it's all the time bullish, buy stonks, so I remember they had this idiot on there. This was a true story. I was catching it one time because I would have it running in the background, and I looked over and there was Serge the Trader. And it was this guy probably in his mid-20s, and he was sitting in a bar in Manhattan, and he had this martini glass in front of him. This shows you how far back it is because he had a big lit cigar. He was in the bar, and they were talking to him. He was arrogant as hell. I'm thinking to myself, who is this putz? And he was talking about, I forget all the stuff he was saying. He was justifying, he was making all this money because we've seen this before. We've seen it in crypto. We see it now. We see it in every kind of speculative bubble. And I remember what he said. They asked him question, and I couldn't believe this idiot was on. I'm thinking to myself, where was this guy working before he got lucky here? And, was he waiting tables at Applebee's? What was he doing? So anyways, he made the comment, stuck in my mind for now 25, 26 years. He takes a big pull on the cigar. He goes, let me tell you people something. This is just how he talked, very condescending. This is the first time in the history of the world that people my age have had this kind of money, and you better get used to it. And I was thinking to myself, that was like the top for me. I was like, I need to go even more short, buy more puts. But anyways, This is something similar. It's interesting when I interact with people. I mean, most of the people I interact with now, you can self-select for a lot with Twitter and things like that. But I mean, yeah, you can listen to John Hussman and all these other people. They can give you all the data about how overvalued, but this thing's going to continue until it doesn't continue anymore. And I'm not going to be part of that. My whole mission and what's made me successful, I'm independently wealthy. I'm retired. I live on, clip coupons, dividends, write covered call options, things like that. Look for cheap investments is to sell overvaluation and buy undervaluation. So I'm not interested in buying these crazy companies at these huge valuations when all of that everything in the next 10 years in their business has to go perfect and doesn't really matter because it's already been priced into the stock. So if anything goes wrong, the thing takes a tumble. And this is what always happens. And so I have the benefit of experience now myself of having seen these things and of course even read about previous bubbles and in times like this, and it's the same thing over and over and over because you're dealing with human beings and human beings have faults and human beings, the fault of people is especially young retail people that don't have a lot of experiences. They want to get rich quick, and that's just not how you get rich. I can put on there. I tell people go to the front of the Berkshire Hathaway annual report. The first page is all of the returns for Berkshire Hathaway over its history since the partnership began back in the 60s. And it goes down at the bottom. They have it averaged by year or whatever by year. I think, Buffett and the partnership and eventually Berkshire Hathaway, 20% a year through all the ups and downs. So you have these people, you can look same thing with Prem Watsa and Fairfax in Canada. He does the same thing because he's a devotee, 18% a year average through all the ups and downs. These are some of the best investors in the world. Okay. And if you want to look at like Renaissance or these other, I think it's the name of it, where they hire all the best mathematicians and physics people out of the top schools every year, and then have computers running everything and create these programs, and they are averaging 50% a year. This is what you're competing with. And yet because of liquidity, because of bubble-licious environments with crypto, people have it in their head because they don't have any experience and they don't know the history and they don't care about it because they're just speculating. It's not investing, speculating. Hey, well, crypto went up so much, then that's my expectation. So their expectations are skewed. They have no grounding in history, market history. They don't know what is really uh, normal returns. And then how hard it is to be an active investor and beat just the market average. Even Buffett says, and I say the same thing to most people, which at this point, what you should do, because the U.S. is so skewed in the average. I think of the world, the U.S. is like 18 or 20% of the GDP of the world, but 65% of the market cap. I mean, that's ridiculous. China's like 20 right behind us or right around where we're at, and they're 4% of. I mean, it should tell you what you should be selling and what you should be buying, but people don't want to listen because of all the central bank shenanigans we had over the last decade plus passive investing versus active investing, how that forced buying happens, and concentrated buying because of indexes and ETF and buying. I mean, it's caused a bubble, and most people can't see it because they feel like they're rich. And I can tell them that when these things turn around, and people smarter than me, Mike Green talks about this all the time. People like that, Luke Groman. We don't have to go too far into this, but that's who I would, if you want to go in depth to how all these mechanisms work, they're the guys to listen to. But anyways, this is eventually going to reverse. And when it does, people haven't been around when a real sell-off happens that lasts for months and months and months, and how it just drags if you haven't experienced it, it's unbelievable. The market never goes up. It never seems like it will go up. And the next thing you know, I mean, the NASDAQ after the crash of the tech wreck, if you want to, that's what they called it. And the NASDAQ was down 80% before it bottomed. So people talk about, well, I'll just buy more, I'll buy the dip. Well, eventually, you're going to have that Wile E. Coyote moment and run out over off the cliff with your legs still moving, and then look down and it's all down. So it's unfortunate, but these things happen over time. You have a new generation of young people, younger investors, people with no experience, and this is what I think is eventually going to happen. But that doesn't mean there's not opportunities. There always are opportunities everywhere. So, like I said, I sell overvaluation and buy undervaluation. So I'm always looking for things that are undervalued.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing a post or article a couple weeks ago that there are now more ETFs than individual stocks that trade. And it's just kind of a sign of the times, sign of the hyper financialization, where when you kind of stack derivatives on top of derivatives, it's leads to interesting things. I think at some point we go back to a more active management environment, but until then, like the passive eating the world dynamic might continue. So we'll kind of see where it goes. But I wanted to get into what's been going on with precious metals, because those have been having a decent move here lately. Silver and gold might be due for a pause, but they're obviously sniffing something out over the last, couple of years really for gold, but silver seems like it's starting to get a move on. What's are you finding anything attractive in the gold and silver space as far as miners that look undervalued, or are you basically hang tight with your current positions?
Well, actually, I have trimmed recently because we have historical overvaluations here in the short and midterm. I mean, we're at points on RSI and some other things that are the greatest they've ever been. It's another bubble. I mean, everybody's talking about gold and silver. We've had tremendous moves in some of the mining shares finally. I'm extremely bullish on gold and silver and platinum, palladium metals for the rest of this decade. But having said that, there will be cyclical retracements inside of a secular move higher. And so I've told people, don't go out and rush out. And I mean, the sentiment, I always track the sentiment. Sentiment and liquidity is what's important for me. The underlying factors that are causing gold to go up are not going to go away. They're going to become even more impressive and help the gold pricing further. The U.S. debt, the fact that it's going to eventually have to be monetized. We've talked about these things before. Other people have talked about this. That's there. Okay, that's that underlying heat that keeps the boil going. But regardless of that, things do become overvalued. People make a lot of money quickly. They take profits. And so there are pullbacks. And what I'm looking at now is we have basically our first move where a lot of the majors moved tremendously. Just look at like Newmont or Agnico Eagle. I mean, they're up tremendously. What we've now seen is I think we're going to get a pullback at some point. And a shakeout because you got too many people on one side of the canoe right now. And what I would be doing is looking at junior producers, near-term producers and developers, not exploration. I'm not into that, but people that are trying to develop mines or prospects into a mine or are just coming into production. Because what happens is these bull markets get going. And what I have seen in the past, in the late 70s, early 80s bull market, which was tremendous, and other ones since one other one since then, it was in the aughts. What happens is the money comes into these large caps. It starts to become acknowledged by the market participants that we're in a bull market, and then interest starts being developed in smaller mid-tier and then the juniors, and then that's where you're really going to see you could go out if you're just a conservative person and buy GDX, or you could just make your own ETF of like Newmont, Agnico, a couple other the ones that are doing well, whatever, and just hold those. And you'll 4-bag those and get dividends and stuff like that. And that'll be relatively safe. You just hold on for the ride. But people, obviously, what I'm looking for now is this transition into these smaller market cap situations where I can get 5, 10, 20, maybe even a 30 bagger. And when you're doing that, I think I've had a lot of experience in private equity investing in startups. And what you have to do in that environment is because there's so many unknowns, especially with a lot of these miners, especially the smaller ones, because they're always on the knife edge of failing because everybody's trying to wreck the project, whether it's the management or the governments, wherever they're operating, or God knows what, you got to create a basket of these things. So I think what people should do is what you should always do in a bull market. You're in a bull market. If you have that view, don't rush out and shoot your wad when gold just hit 3,700. We're getting ready to have a rate cut this week, which is probably going to be a sell the news event for the market and probably for the gold market. Everything's priced in. Everybody knows that we've just started a rate cutting cycle in the U.S. It's the last major economy in the world to do that. And so people will be looking to take profits. So that's what I'd be looking for. Build yourself a shopping list. Now, this isn't, the average person doesn't have the time or ability to do this. So what you should do is cultivate and follow recognized authorities on this, which I'm not going to mention here, but you can find them if you want to, people that have consistently been correct in analyzing these things. And you have to build a basket. You buy 10 of these things, okay? 2 or 3 do okay. 6 or 7 of them don't do anything or go down tremendously, and 1 or 2 of them go 20 or 30 bag. And you're going to add a lot to your net worth doing that. But that's not what people do. They do is they go out and spend a lot of time on Twitter or CEO.ca or whatever, and they get wedded to one name, and then they're like advocates for it, and then something doesn't go right, and then they miss out on the entire bull market. Saw that in uranium stocks, same thing. So that's what I would suggest people do. If you don't have the time, just buy on dips. Whenever we get a pullback, just buy one of the ETFs. And there's also proxy ways to play it. I mean, I have in my portfolio, in the newsletter, in the model portfolio, a company that provides drilling services for explorers and developers, and they have a large market share. And as these are extractive industries, and as the cash flows improve, and interest improves, then when these smaller companies go for a private placement where they used to be able to raise $1 million, now they can raise $5 million, and this gets turned into the drill bit. So there's other second tier ways or proxy ways to play these too. I mean, look at the CEO Venture Exchange. It's just now breaking out. This is where a lot of these mining stocks trade. You could look at a company. One way to example of proxy play is just buy like a company like Sprott, because they're so intertwined in that as a merchant bank and creating these ETFs, and you just ride along. You don't have to go out and pick that junior that you think is going to. The problem is everybody says, well, I have $1,000 in my Robinhood account. Tell me the company that's going to go up 30 times. Well, who knows this? So that's what I advocate. But I think things are a little bit frothy right now in gold and silver. Then eventually, silver will explode past gold. When we get to the climax of this move, that's what typically happens. Silver takes off and really goes nuts, and those mining stocks really go nuts too. So that's an opportunity. That's kind of when you'll know this thing's blowing off. You'll get a blow off top in these things, but this is an opportunity. We're probably only in the second or third inning, but these things don't go straight up, and they do wash people out. They do, if you look at the chart of a mining stock, junior or just whatever, these things can go up and down 50% both ways in 1 year. That's how volatile they are. But if you can use that volatility to your advantage and understand that and control your emotions, I think you can do well. But that's the rub.
Yeah, it's interesting because platinum has been sitting here going sideways for a while, and I kind of see what's going on in gold and silver, and I look at that as the most asymmetric of all three as far as just the metals price. But it is interesting to see how quickly sentiment can get to a point where it's like, okay, certain channels that focus on commodities, everything is focused on gold and silver, and you see stuff on Twitter, and it just kind of is a interesting way to gauge some of that stuff. But I do think, like you said, it is basically a long-term durable bull market here for kind of all the precious metals, and I think for most commodities really. But that kind of brings me to oil, which is still I think the most hated of the commodities, especially in energy. It seems like even the oil people like natural gas right now. But as far as oil and maybe what you kind of see over the next 6 to 12 months, there's lots of talk about inventory builds, all this stuff being bearish, OPEC getting rid of their cuts, all this stuff. And I still, looking through some of the data information, I still struggle to see how we're going to go back to $45, $50 a barrel based on all this bearish news, bearish narrative that's floating out around there. So What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I have a contrarian view about the economies. I don't know where people are getting this bearish view from. This is ridiculous. The U.S., for example, we're probably already in a mild recession. We're not going to have a financial crisis unless the market completely falls apart. Like, that's what's the catalyst to this. If you look at what's been going on with global central banks, I track this. Liquidity and sentiments, which drive markets. Stan Druckenmiller, probably actually the greatest investor. Liquidity has been on the upswing for the last 2 years. Every central bank around the world is cutting rates. Okay, we have 9% money M1 money growth going on in the world right now. You have the last major central bank in the world, the United States, now entering a rate cutting cycle. Look at the global PMIs, Purchasing Manager Index, in different regions. Okay, most of the countries are above 50 in their manufacturing. That means they're expanding. Where's this recession everybody's talking about? It's not going to happen. I have a contrarian view. As long as the liquidity is increasing, this is going to be stimulative. Okay, we're in this massive rate cutting cycle that's been going on. I track it month to month. I have a kind of like an advanced decline type thing. I add how many and subtract. If 11 central banks cut and one raises rates, that ends up being a net negative number. You've had net cuts for 23 months in a row, and it's going to continue for some time. What will derail it? Well, inflation returns. When will inflation return? Well, when energy prices increase, because as PMIs, U.S. Global Investors had a good chart about this, Frank Trotter's outfit, showing the correlation between global PMI and commodity prices. Obviously, if manufacturing is in services, PMIs are above 50 and expanding, especially in manufacturing, what's that require? It requires commodity inputs, it requires energy, it requires copper, it requires iron ore. Iron ore prices are now bottomed and look like they're rallying. Same thing with coal. Okay, this is out of favor. This idea that we're going to we're running 7% of GDP deficits in the U.S. and we're entering a rate cutting cycle. Where's this? We are tightening the labor force with deportations. Where's this recession? Yes, you can have a mild recession if you to say that we're going to have something like you said that's going to drive oil prices down to $45 or $50 a barrel. It's ridiculous. Oil's bottom. Look at the charts of the major oil companies. They're all rounding and starting to move higher. That's because people that actually know what they're doing as investors, value investors. I talked about this before. I was listening to Adam Waterous and Cole Smead. Cole Smead is with his dad runs Smead Capital Management. He's been on this. Look at the oil sands, for example, in Canada. I don't want to invest in Canada. Mark Carney. These politicians are irrelevant. There's so much money involved. So you have crown jewel investments. And I'll talk publicly about these names. CNQ, Synovus, Imperial, Suncor. Go buy those. Put 5-10 grand in each one of those, and in 3 to 5 years, you're going to have a tremendous amount of money. Why? They've made hundreds of billions of dollars in investments over the last 20 years, building these huge oil sands operations, which are operating. They're manufacturing processes. They know how to operate them safely and correctly. Their cost is about $40 a barrel, and so they just have maintenance capital now. What's maintenance capital? Well, it's machines. You have to upgrade things. You have to repair things, but they're not building new, oil sands facilities. And so even at current oil prices, the cash flows are $50 to $60 billion a year in these companies I mentioned. Okay, free cash flow. And the maintenance capital is about $20 billion. So they have $30 billion a year at current oil prices in this horrible country, communist country, Canada, that Mark Carney is going to run into the ground, evidently. And what are they doing with the cash? They're paying dividends. All these companies have 5-6% dividend yields, and they're buying back shares. And so if you think that oil prices go into 40, well, then I would probably buy more. But I would suggest to you, if somebody wants to put $10,000 in escrow against my $10,000 of where oil prices will be in 3 to 5 years, they won't be at 40. They'll probably be triple digit. The fact remains is that it looks like U.S. shale, the cornucopia of shale that has dominated the news, dominated the oil markets, dominated non-OPEC supply for 15 or 20 years, is peaking now. And it also looks like that the IEA, who's been poo-pooing, which is a globalist tool, let's say, who's been poo-pooing demand growth for years, has now reversed that. Oh, gee, oil's not going away for a couple decades, I guess. Yeah, it's going to keep
Yeah.
growing like it always
Where'd
has.
all the capex go?
Yeah,
I don't know
so
if you saw some of that, but like they show
exactly.
charts of what happens when it's like, oh yeah, the decline rates if we don't invest or underinvest look like this,
Yeah,
and it's, I mean, demand is going to be, I think, up and
exactly.
to the right. So
That's exactly right. And so I think this is a tremendous opportunity. Is it something that's going to materialize by the end of the year or the next week? Probably not. But I would suggest to you that you're going to have upward pressure on oil prices uh, in through the end of the decade, because you have this almost generational. It's similar to the uranium story because of the um, lack of investment in the extractive industry. People have left the industry. Look at the amount of the class sizes at the Colorado School of Mines for petroleum engineers, things like that, or people that go to school at University of Houston or Texas Tech. Nobody goes into petroleum. Most of my friends that work at Schlumberger that I knew up in Houston, they're all from foreign countries like Egypt or something like that, because the people, nobody here, they have to bring guys in because nobody studies this, because oil was going away. Remember electric vehicles? So I mean, this is another of these things that's starting to get dismantled by reality. And I think the underinvestment, you know, people have told me, well, John, you've been talking about offshore oil for years. How can you have any money? Yeah, well, you haven't made money in the 4 or 5 drillers in the U.S., but I own a driller in Norway that's doing fine. And I own companies that provide subsea services that have record backlogs and have the same problem as everybody else. It's kind of like that part in Scarface when they had so much cash they were carrying it into the bank in duffel bags. They didn't even know what to do with it all. It's kind of what these companies are in, that provide these services. They're just like have so much cash coming in, and what are they doing? Buying back stock, and their book to bill ratios are over 1 every quarter. Listen to the conference calls. That means they have more orders coming in than they're be able to get out the door. And so you have this basically stealth bull market going on. And so I think you look at the drillers now, the offshore drillers, look at their charts. They're starting to turn now. It's becoming evident what's happening. So I think it's kind of typical of Wall Street, and it goes back to what we were talking about at the start. People get it in their head a certain way that things are the way they are, but they're not really like that. The idea that, I was so fortunate that I was in the energy industry and I saw these things. And I said, this is not reality. People need to understand the law of large numbers we're talking about, the amount of energy inputs that have to go into an advanced economy and what's required to do that. It's not going to happen, with these fantasies. And it's been proven right now. And so even the IEA, who has been controlled opposition, has having to back down. And OPEC's been saying this for years. Of course, no one wanted to listen to OPEC because, hey, they're incentivized to constantly sell more oil. But the heads of OPEC have been saying the same thing. It's been underinvestment. We're going to have higher prices down the line. Everybody's worried about their spare capacity. Do I really want to believe Saudi Arabia and Kuwait on what spare capacity they actually have? No, they lie constantly. People lie in this world. I hate to tell people, for their own advantage. So I wouldn't count on spare capacity from OPEC. So we're going to have a problem, and it's going to be adjudicated via higher oil prices. And that's what I think is going to happen.
yeah, I think the people that are trying to sell 5 million, 6 million barrels a day of spare capacity are, I think, on something. Is there 1 to 2 million barrels a day? Maybe. I mean, we'll find out, I guess, at some point. But I wanted to also ask you, because this is one area I was talking to a friend who's also involved in my favorite misfit investment the other day. But he has experience in oil field services, and said he has sold a couple companies. And he said the onshore guys, like, they're all cheap, but they're still getting squeezed by the producers. And he basically said, like, there's going to come a point where those guys just keep getting run over to where that whole industry atrophies. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on the kind of onshore side of oil services, or I know some people started to talk about the water side of things, and he was not very bullish on the whole water oil field services side. But I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the onshore oil services in general, if you have anything you like there.
Not interested. I think that it's very highly cyclical. It's an easier business to get into than it is like in some of these offshore businesses. I've seen people pop up. I've been solicited over the last few years for some companies that were getting involved in various onshore oil field services. Didn't want to participate. I didn't understand what their competitive advantage was. What will end up happening, I think, if things keep the downturn is you have to really understand the cyclicality of these industries, because I can just take you up the road here and you can see these yards starting to fill up with frac equipment and stuff like that. It just sits out in the weather. And this is not equipment that can just sit out in the weather. Rust is not your friend. And if you sit there and 18 or 24 months later, the cycle turns, well, you can't just drag that machinery back into the oil field and turn it on and it's going to work. That's not how things work. And so this stuff melts away. The people melt away. Guys, I know executives in the oil patch, and I know guys that are hands, and they don't sit around. The hands don't sit around at the house when they get laid off. They go find something else to do. And whether that's building substations or T lines or data centers, I don't know what they're going to go do. But when they're making a bunch of money and $5,000 a month in per diem and got a $1,500 a month F-250 payment and 2 kids and a house payment, it's hard to get them back once they and so these are things I think I just don't it's not something I have interest in, because I think it's just highly cyclical and hard to understand. As far as the water situation, I mean, I think I don't own these companies because I like the water situation. I think they kind of stumbled into the water situation. But if you listen to what like TPL and Landbridge are talking about in the Permian Basin, if you listen to what Devon says, the CEO of Devon said recently, and some other operators on the Permian, water is a big problem. They just don't have anywhere to put the water anymore. And but TPL and Landbridge have created these huge side businesses just based on dealing with all this produced from somewhere else. But he said that, basically these shale wells are nothing but water wells with a little bit of oil in them. So, I don't think I would go out and create a water disposal business, but I think that, if you're a toll operator like Landbridge and TPL are, plus the other things that they're trying to get into, I think they're interesting. But I mean, I just stay offshore because it's a smaller industry. It's more technical. It's more difficult to get into. So it has a high barrier to entry, and it's already atrophied substantially. And so when the influx of spending inevitably comes, rates are going to explode because there just isn't enough equipment and people to be able to handle, even going back to, even if you get into they won't be able to handle the next cycle. So prices are going to explode. Day rates will go to 800,000 for a 7G or 8G rig. And I mean, you'll have to get in line for, BLP blowout preventers and all this stuff. And Saipem they already have a $40 billion backlog, and now they're merging with Subsea. So you're just going to have to get in line. So I think, yes, if prices go high enough, capital will come into these things, but I'm not really interested in like onshore oil services. It's just too volatile and too sick.
Yeah, it's tough to dig through some of these companies and find me to somewhere that I think at least some of the guys that are leaving the oil field end up in, and that's real estate. And I kind of look at residential real estate as I think in the next several years we're going to get more affordable real estate prices. But what's your kind of view on the whole residential housing market in general? If there's like a view on home builders, or if you think, I guess, general house prices, what's your kind of view there?
Overvalued. And I think that it doesn't really matter if rates come down, because it'll be interesting to see what happens with this rate cutting cycle if the 10-year comes in, because it's not just the interest rates. It's like, okay, well, the house I want to buy is $500,000. Okay, yeah, my payment will go down if the mortgage rates go from like 8% down to 6%, but still, still fairly high because the prices of houses are just too expensive relative to people's incomes and things like that. So plus you have demographics starting to kick in now. I want to see what happens when all this Airbnb nonsense that people bought these things. A lot of this stuff blows up, which is starting to happen from what I am understanding. These things are cyclical too. We're seeing housing market, and I just think that it'll be once this thing washes out, which it inevitably will. It'll be something I keep an eye on because I'll buy anything if it's cheap enough. So, but what does that mean? And residential real estate's not, in my mind, should not be considered an investment. It's something that you live in, that you create family in and memories. It happens to go up. It went up because of inflation, because of the Cantillon effect of the central bank creating currency units. People don't understand that you can sit there and say, what's your real money that you make after all the taxes you pay? You probably would have been better off renting and just putting your money into an S&P fund. But anyway, that's kind of how I look at that. I'm not interested in that so much. I've never really been a big real estate person. I had some real estate rental properties that are a pain in the ass. I don't generally like people in general, so I don't like people calling me about their water heater or whatever. I like people individually, but as groups, and people that renters are not my kind of people I really like hanging around. But it wasn't worth it. And there are some tax advantages. Most of the wealth, a lot of big wealth has been created in this country because of tax laws and things like that. If you can deal with, if you're a wheeler dealer, commercial real estate and things like that, but that's kind of been decimated too, right? With who buys stuff at stores anymore. People order everything online. So, I mean, I guess if you really know what you're doing and you're specialized and you're in the right place at the right time, you can make money, but it's not something I'm interested in that much,
Yeah.
actually.
I guess that gets me to the question is what are certain places that you are interested in, whether it's certain geographies that are cheap and are valued, maybe other commodities we haven't hit on yet. Where are you finding some opportunities as far as different parts of the market or different things that are maybe idiosyncratic or maybe based on results of certain elections or changes in policy, stuff like that?
So I think that whether this administration wants it by design or not, I think they want a lower dollar. They're probably going to get a lower dollar. That's usually going to be beneficial for commodities. I think we're going to commodity super cycle. It's not necessarily going to be demand driven, it's more supply driven, lack of supply. So I think there's going to be opportunities there in different sectors. They don't all kind of move at the same time at the same rate. So you have to be kind of selective. I like, you mentioned I like what I'm seeing in Latin America. There's going to be several elections there over the next year or so, year or two, three. And it looks like that election in Bolivia and the 20-year Evo Morales regime, he was already out of politics, but his socialists really lost more to a center-right regime. I mean, it's not investable, but it's giving you an indication. You're getting ready to have elections in November in Chile. This guy his last name's Cast. Look on Polymarket, he has about a 70% chance of winning. He's way past center right. He's right wing. Law and order agenda and business focused. Chilean stocks are they're already up about 30-some% this year, but I think you could see, going the right direction. Colombia has an election next year. The guy that's in there now, Petros, is the last name, I believe. He's on his way out. It's interesting to look at the same kind of thing as Cass. Wants to return to the policies of Uribe. These things, if they pan out, are going to get started as they get closer to the elections. It becomes more and more obvious who's going to win. People are going to start pricing in this stuff. So we saw what can happen in a country when you get political change that's perceived as being pro-business to get away from some of this socialist nonsense. You can get a pretty good repricing. So I'm pretty bullish on Latin America, even Brazil is starting to move. If you look at the even the ETF there, I think Lula's probably not going to run next time. I think he's up for election next year too. But anyways, That's a little bit further out, but I like that. I like Central Asia. It gets ignored. It's a tremendous opportunity. I kind of like what one of my friends has coined the new Silk Road, basically from Turkey all the way through the stands in Iran and these places. I'm a big fan of what's happening in the global south and east as we get this multipolar world. I think that's being ignored of entering the middle class and who are aligned together against the U.S. Atlanticist hegemon, which is in retreat. So I'm looking for opportunities there. You can buy, you look at a country like Uzbekistan, I'm very bullish on. You can buy TBC Bank, which is a Georgian bank, a bank in the Republic of Georgia that's done very well, trains in London, and they're expanding their presence in Uzbekistan. One of my main performers, I'll mention this, and I have experience with this. It's in my portfolio now. It's been one of the best performers. We've owned it for several years. It's the Bank of Georgia. It's the largest bank in the Republic of Georgia. Georgia's a small republic in the Caucasus. Over a decade ago of pro-business, and the economy basically grew. It's one of the only economies in the world that grew through COVID, along with Uzbekistan, that had positive economic growth. But anyways, they've kind of expanded. They have huge returns on equity. These things trade at like tremendous. They're just totally cheap, and people ignore them. And I think that the one company I actually own the Bank of Georgia through is a proxy. It's up like 5 times since we own it. It's still probably only selling at like 60% of net asset value. So these are the opportunities that exist. I mean, I own a company that's an Asian conglomerate. They own the largest noodle company in Indonesia. They own all these power production plants and toll roads in the Philippines. These things are selling as a dividend yield of 6.5. It sells at 4 times earnings. Nobody cares about these things. Nobody is interested in them because, hey, that's investing. People are more interested in speculating, buying some AI stock with a good story and hope they can sell it to some other fool for more money. So these things exist everywhere. Japan, the changes that the Ministry of Finance has made and the Bank of Japan forcing companies that have just been hoarding assets and cash on their balance sheets to start becoming increased dividends. If you want to be a Warren Buffett circa 1950s and 60s, that's what you do. You just get the Japanese company handbook. I have it over here. It's about 4 inches thick, and go company by company, and you just shocked about how cheap these things are. It's interesting. You can read an article, which I think is interesting, in Horizon Kinetics last month. They just created a fund in Japan, but it's focused on, I lived in Japan for 3 years, very structured society. So if you're a middle manager in a company, they talk about this company called Japan Elevator Service. If you're one of the big elevator operators and maintenance people, if you're in middle management, you're just there to work your whole life. They have lifetime employment. You don't rock the boat, you just keep done. So they had a guy that created his own company because he was entrepreneurial, and he went against the grain. He's able to provide better service. He created this company, so it's a play on counterculture, because the Japanese culture, business culture, is different than ours. And if you are willing to do that, I mean, there's opportunity there. So I think that there is opportunity available. I think that I've said this before, that I think the changes in the world that are happening are tectonic. They're going to create a massive amount of political, economic, social change most people aren't prepared for, and this is going to create a tremendous amount of opportunity, yet will be very volatile. I mean, we're destroying the newsletter's destroying the S&P. We're beating it. We've beat it for the last 5 years. But there's people that are doing far better than me. I don't know what they invest in, but I kind of look at it as Aesop's fable, tortoise and hare. We just keep compounding capital. I'm looking for people, companies, and opportunities, because if I buy things cheaply that are doing well, that eventually if they continue to invest and keep doing what they're doing, then they'll get revalued higher. So that's kind of what I do, and it seems to be working. And I'm trying to stay away from things and not get caught up in the hysteria, like gold mining. You just mentioned it earlier. No one's talking about platinum again. It had this little run. platinum is eventually going to be at parity with gold, like it has always been, and probably exceed it because it's substantially less available in the Earth's crust than gold is. But no one's talking about it. I have a name in mind that is a copper and soon to be platinum group metal company, but I'm not going to say because I'm going to write it up next month in the newsletter. But it's been cut in half or worse because of some recent near-term problems they've had, which are being rectified. And you're in business with probably one of the best mining entrepreneurs in the history of the industry. So there's always opportunity somewhere.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because certain things will get popular at certain times, and you see the volatility and all these different things that kind of tends to come with looking for stuff that's out of favor. But one other place we kind of have seen some volatility is in kind of current events and politics and some of the other stuff that's happened in recent weeks. I figured I would have to get your thoughts on some of that while I have you, because I think there are certain things that have happened where it, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes, like specifically the Charlie Kirk assassination, I guess, and the reaction to it from certain types is, I think, eye-opening for people that would be considered like right in the center, like politically moderate. But what's your kind of view on some of the political changes and how like recent events might be like a signpost for where we're at and where we might be headed?
Well, I mean, I've said for several years now that I believe the United States is in a cold civil war. And I've made it very clear what my political views are. I'm very right wing. I'm very nationalistic. Forget about MAGA, man. That's not my cup of tea. Look, Charlie Kirk was a family man. He had a wife and young kids. He didn't deserve to be murdered. Charlie Kirk was controlled opposition. He's a gatekeeper. He took the ticket. He started to get it. He took the money when he was 18. We know who he took the money from. I don't need to get into that. He started to get a conscience. He pimped for them, for these people for years, and then he started getting a conscience. He didn't, he started realizing he's taking money from people that controlled him, that he took the ticket from. That he had to go out and advocate for the murder and dispossession of a people, and he wasn't willing to do that anymore. And so I think that's part of the issue. But this is what happens. This is what these gatekeepers are. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Candace Owens. These are all controlled opposition. Okay, they're there for a reason. They're to keep the Overton window from moving too far to the right, and everybody focuses on that. That doesn't mean the man should have been killed. I mean, I just talked about it in my reality check. I have to put the stuff on Rumble and BitChute because if I put it on YouTube, I would be banned. And plus, a lot of the people that I'm running a newsletter business here, and most people don't want to hear. They don't want the stuff mixed in. But you asked me, so I tell you. I mean, I think all of this is. I don't really have an opinion on what happened. I'm not qualified. I'm not in the Secret Service or the Green Berets or us. But I do know one thing. I know a bullshit story when I hear it, and so I think that this was bullshit. And I think if you take tickets from people and then you don't, the problem that Charlie Kirk didn't evidently understand, because I do believe he was a sincere Christian person, and he started getting pangs of conscience, is when you're bought, you have to stay bought. The expectation of the people that give you money is that you're going to stay bought. And when you choose not to do that, well, that's going to create probably some friction and problems. Do I believe some transgender or gay guy that was living with his transgender furry lover? It's just too Hollywood, man. These people control the media in Hollywood. I'm talking about the establishment. They can spin up any narrative they want. I didn't see a rifle in the guy's hand. I was in the military. Where's the rifle? Well, he took it apart and had the barrel in his face. That Mauser cannot be taken apart in the field that quickly. And then why would you reassemble it and wrap it? It's just too Hollywood, man. That's just one thing. I feel bad for his family. But it'll be interesting to see now. I think what the interesting thing for me is watch what happens to his organization. Within a day, Ben Shapiro, who's the most dirtbag person in the commentariat, he's going to take the mantle. I mean, if he shows up at a Texas University, I'm probably going to go there and confront him just for my own conscience. I cannot stand that guy. But to see who steps up, it's going to be more controlled, opposition. I would encourage people to there's been a really good article. He usually does a good job. A guy named Ron Unz has a site called the Unz Review or Report, and he wrote a pretty good article about this, where he kind of collated all of this discussion around not necessarily the assassination, but who this guy really was, about the fact that he was controlled opposition, and that he wasn't what he seemed to be, you know. And that's what all of these people are. You don't get to have 5.4 million YouTube followers and people listening to you unless you're allowed to, and you're put in that situation. So um, I think it's amusing. What I think is important to people to understand is what I've been saying before. I think the first time you interviewed me, I said, read the book, The Black Book of Communism. I'm reading that again now. I'm in the section about when the Bolsheviks took over. Because they were very small. His faction, Lenin's faction, was very small and didn't have a lot of power. And he was constantly advocating for, well, you need to get the Petrograd Sailor Soviet. We need to arm. We need to take over. We need to liquidate our enemies. This is what you're dealing with, the same mentality on this other side. And I'm not this person that, wants to fall into the trap of let's get everything riled up. I'm just making observations. I have no opinion on these things. Okay. And because it doesn't matter what I think, this particular way that we do business in the U.S., the Rams against the Vikings, and you're on that team and I'm on this team, we need to score points. This is all bullshit to distract people from what's really going on. And this is all destined for the dustbin of history, another Leninism. And I think it's important, to watch what these people say. What I'm fascinated by is how stupid people really are. If you have an opinion that you think it was appropriate to murder a guy over his opinions, whether they were controlled opposition or whatever the real reason he was out there doing this stuff, and get on there, it's just funny watching people say, because now, they're getting the same treatment that other folks got on the other side when they were being canceled. And they were going, well, what about my free speech, my constitutional rights? Yes, you have the right to say and do anything you want. I've had this philosophical argument with a lot of people. You want to go out and shoot Charlie Kirk? You want to go out and try to shoot the president? You want to go out and do this? You want to do whatever? You can do it. You have free will. The law isn't going to stop you, but you have to be prepared to pay the consequences. And if you want to work for a business or an organization that has mission statements and is trying to accomplish something, and then you're out there on TikTok screaming about you're so happy this happened, and you hope that his wife and kids get wasted, of course you're going to be fired, and people are going to dox you. And I just think it's amazing to see, how the internet, the raw narcissism, why would you get on there and say things like, even if you thought that, you have no self-introspection, you don't really understand how things work. And I hate to say this, Ben, but these people are out there voting, and you have to interact with these people. So I think when I look at it, it's more amusing to see just the continued de-evolution and deterioration of civilization of the United States. It's just not going to hold. I mean, eventually, you can distill this down to basically one thing. Eventually, the debt situation in the U.S. is going to do in this empire like it did in all the other ones for a large part. The dollar is going to go. When the dollar goes, the United States will not exist as an intact political entity. When's that happen? I don't know. 2032, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? It's eventually going to happen. And then a lot of things are going to change. And people don't have their head right. And that's why I encourage people to read Charlie Munger. He said envy and having like these bad feelings towards other people, it's just not worth it. You're not getting he said envy was one of the worst vices to have, because there's no, if you're out carousing with women, well, that's kind of fun to a certain thing. Going out partying, being a drunk, using drugs, I guess people can, there's no fun with being envious and being just having this hatred towards other people. It's just not productive. So most people, I just found that whole situation interesting. But again, when I look, this is why I focus to the global South and East. The people in the West they're just gone, man. There's morally and spiritually bankrupt, and that's just not going to be a recipe for, that has to be fundamental to a nation state and some other things. And when I look at Russia or China, people say, why don't you move there? Yeah, well, I will. As soon as the war ends in Russia, I plan on moving. That interrupted my plan. I would be there already. But I would rather live in a country where, there's law and order, and the government, at least ostensibly, has at least the at least mouse that they're platitudes, that they at least have some caring about the people that actually live in the country, and not to some other country or some globalist agenda that is basically diametrically opposed to the people in the country's interests. So I think that's but it doesn't really matter. This is all kind of coffee house crap. I just think it's worth looking at it from a really the spiritual is what I'm getting into. The spiritual, these people are really morally and spiritually bankrupt on both sides. I mean, they're ready to have a civil war. And who's behind the scenes pulling the strings? Well, you can talk about that for hours, but
It's the
it's just
usual
amazing.
suspects
Yeah. Well,
for
I have my
all
views
that
on that, but
stuff.
I don't want to get banned. You can be Andrew Anglin too and be a kamikaze and talk about it. I don't disagree with them, but you get basically deplatformed from everything. So
Yeah.
people can do that if they choose to. I don't see there's any particular upside, and me going and saying that isn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
These things are going to self-destruct anyways, because they are full of so many internal you can't liquidate an entire group of people and expect that the international community isn't eventually going to have enough. When I think another thing I will say, just in conclusion, once the baby boomers die off, which they are now, a lot of things are going to change. A lot of things that they supported that we think are, whether they're economic, like housing and some other things, or our views towards certain other countries, are going to change dramatically, because there just won't be the same support for some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've started to talk about a little bit more, because I think there's not many people paying attention to it, but the attitudes from younger generations on a variety of topics are very different than people who grew up watching CBS or like nightly news, whatever it is on TV. And I think you see it with the average age of some of these cable news networks, where it's like, what, 71, 72 for some of them. And the youngest is like 68, something like that. And that was probably a couple of years ago I saw that stat. So we'll see where it goes. I think it'll be interesting to see how some of these things change. On certain things, I'm optimistic. On other things, not so much. But as far as like how things might play out for the U.S. and maybe for Western countries over the next 5 or 10 years, I think that'd be an interesting place to start to wrap up and get your opinion on, because I think the U.S. is in a better position for a variety of reasons than Europe, but I still think we're going to have to get a lot of things in order to basically get through this in one piece. So what's your kind of view on maybe U.S. and Europe and what the next 5 or 10 years hold?
Oh, Europe's cooked, man. Forget about it. It's going to be interesting at the NATO meetings in 10 years, if it still exists by then, when you have Islamic, probably majorities or governments, or large Islamic, very militant Islam, by the way. Listen to what the people like in the UAE, ministers in the UAE and Saudi. I had the minister of UAE was on. He said he cannot believe that these people are allowed to speak like they do in the UK and France. I'm talking about Islamic imams and stuff. They would never be allowed in Egypt or Jordan or Saudi. These people would be arrested immediately. Why are you allowing this? He said. And so that's going to be, people don't want to talk about. That's the biggest challenge for Europe. It's being Islamicized. There's a site. It's called the Middle Eastern Media something Institute, MEMRI. I've been watching it for 25 years. They've been putting the videos up of the sermons that are given in the mosques, all this stuff. You can watch it hundreds, thousands of hours of them telling you what they're doing, what they're in the process of doing, what they're doing now. There's not going to be a militant by the sword jihad. Most of them now have convinced themselves, and that this is what they say is, we don't need to, what they did historically was just invade areas and then force by the sword conversion, or if you were lucky and you had a certain, you just pay the tax and be a second-class citizen. But they don't need to do that, because they say now that we're going to conquer the West with our women's wombs. We don't need to use weapons. We're having 5, 6, 7 kids. They're all on benefits. None of these people work. Okay. More than half of them in the UK don't work. So you're paying for your own displacement. The people in the West, because of, we don't have time to get into it, are going extinct. They seem to be fine with it. And now that the levels of Islamic immigration and out of control births are to the point now where, 20 years ago, you probably could have said, okay, you got to go back and we'll pay you to go back and stuff like that. You're past that now. What'll probably happen is as they get more power, they will start instituting Sharia, which they already are, pushing the limits on it. But once they get into the parliaments, for heaven's sakes, there's 5 Somalis in the Minnesota state legislature. I mean, what do people don't, and they blatantly will tell you what they're there to do: support the interests of Somalia first. You can't be in the legislature, but nobody seems to think it's a problem. And then it's just going to jump up and bite people in the ass one day. And, we had guys in Houston going around and telling people, most of them were Indian store owners, they were going around telling them you can't sell beer, you can't sell lottery tickets, any pork products. We're strongly suggesting you comply with this because eventually we're going to come into power and we'll force you. And the Indians were just sitting there with their arms crossed laughing. We won't be laughing in 10 or 20 years because this is the major issue in the West that needs to be dealt with, especially in Europe. Europe's bankrupt morally, intellectually, spiritually, any way you can think of it. It's totally bankrupt. And the people that are in power there, you just had elections in Westphalia, North Rhine, AfD. That's in Western Germany where they don't do well. They are doing well there now because people can see what's happening. I just saw all the layoff news: 40,000 at Mercedes, 30,000 at Porsche, 20,000 at Volkswagen, 40% of ThyssenKrupp's workforce, steelmaker, layoffs. So deindustrialization of Germany, people don't want it. And the leaders of all of these European countries are serving an agenda that's not nationwide. And so I think that they're running out of time. They had a march in the UK this weekend, 3 million people. But unfortunately, I think you're not going to vote your way out of it. And I don't want, I shudder to think you're either probably going to have to fight. And it's going to be very bloody and ugly, probably the worst, even worse than what happened in Europe in the 30s and 40s. Yes, I believe in order to fix the problem, that's how bloody and awful it will have to get, or you'll submit. More than likely, the people will just submit. That's the easiest thing to do and hope that they can keep their head down. I'll be the last gazelle. I think it's amazing to watch that some of the people that you will see that have, because they hate Western culture, they hate white people, they hate their own self, their own ancestry, their own history, that they will align with this foreign force and then think that at some point these people are just useful idiots that once they gain power, well, again, read the Black Book of Communism. Once you gain power, you don't need the useful idiots anymore. And the Muslims won't need the LGBT community or the liberals or anything. They'll just cast them away because then they'll have power. And then, they'll commence to doing what they always do: throw these people off the roofs and stuff like that, which they do in their own homeland. So it's going to be ugly. I don't invest in Western Europe, because it's a joke. I don't know how you can put capital there based on the trends, and the people really need to have an awakening, a spiritual awakening. And I don't know if it's going to come in time. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to see some of the different changes and how quickly things have gotten out of control. And I've talked to several people that have left Europe or are thinking about leaving. And I think it's really tough to get excited about the future for that part of the world. So before I let you go, I do have to ask my traditional closing question, which is, what book should I add to my reading list? I know there's been several in your previous appearances I haven't gotten around to reading yet, but figured I could keep growing the list while I have you.
I think it's interesting, just based on what you're seeing, the reaction to Mr. Kirk's shooting and some of the people, it's hard to process for a lot of people. Not hard for me to process, because we talked about, before we started the interview, talking about having a philosophical anchor and thinking what you actually believe and what your values are. Then it's a little bit easier, but most people don't have this. And I think there was a book, there was a guy named, his last name was Peck. He was a psychologist in the 50s and 60s. And he wrote a book called The People of the Lie. And it was a delving into the psychology of evil. I encourage people to go online. I talked about it in my weekly reality check video. You can go just to get a sampling of how what he's talking about. You don't have to read the book. You can watch this one video. It's called "The People of the Lie: The Story of Bobby." He talks about one of the it's out of the People of the Lie book, but he's talking about a teenager that he interacted with, and the kid's older brother, had committed suicide with a .22 rifle, and so this Bobby was the surviving sibling. And he had looked up to the older brother, and they had a close relationship, obviously. And he was becoming increasingly depressed and withdrawn. His grades went down, and so they brought him to Dr. Peck, who was a psychiatrist. His parents did, and so he's talking to them about how he what's going on with their son, blah blah blah. And he finds out that the parents, this Bobby, had a recent birthday, and he's talking about this narcissism and this evil. It's not just about going out and shooting Charlie Kirk. It's about the spiritual destruction of another person. And so the Bobby, surviving sibling, had a birthday after his brother had passed or committed suicide. And the parents gave Bobby the .22 rifle that his brother, as a birthday present, the .22 rifle that he had committed suicide. And so Dr. Peck was like, what is going on here, man? Why would you do that? They had all of these reasons. Well, we don't have that much money. We're just working people. We're not advanced psychiatrists. Like, we're just simple people. And he's like, why would you do that? And so eventually what had happened, it was a good ending to this. It's a video. Somebody's reading the passages out of the book. He's able to get the kid away from his parents and with an aunt in another state. And once he was separated from these people, he basically recovered and got good grades again, came out of his depression. But this is what people are looking at. The point I'm trying to make is it's a good place to start, because he has several books. People can read them. He explains what's really going on with evil and why because people are looking at some of these crazy people. It's like, well, it's easy to say, well, they're just demonically possessed, which I think some of them actually are, but not all of them. They're just evil people. And so where does this evil come from? How does it manifest? What are they really trying to accomplish? And, it's one thing to like shoot at somebody, but then they come on and then make comments that you hope and wish that you're happy about the death of another human being being murdered, and that you hope his wife and kids get murdered. I mean, that's real evil. And so where does that come from? And he kind of explores that, and it's really kind of eye-opening. And I think a lot of people are searching for that, because they're like, if you're a normal person, a normal human being, you don't think like that. And so I think people are trying to search for it. It's a good place to start. It's easy to read. It's not like a psychology textbook. He just uses these vignettes to explain, and he calls these people the people of the lie. And it's kind of eye-opening. So that's what I would recommend. It's kind of apropos for this time, and I'm rereading it now.
Yeah, I'll have to add that to the list. It sounds interesting, and you hear that story of like what they did with the .22, like that just seems like a pretty obvious thing, but to give that as a gift, like, yeah. Anyway,
crazy,
it's just insane. It's just insane. But anyway, as far as where my listeners can look for your work or your political updates, Substack, social media, where should they keep an eye out for you?
Yeah, I have the YouTube channel. I have the weekly market update. I have links to the reality check where I split my political commentary. That's all on Rumble and BitChute. Also on Substack, I have a free weekly email that goes out that I curate a lot of information and usually write a little small article about these themes. But then I also have the paid product for specific recommendations about a lot of these themes that we've talked about during this interview. So that's available on Substack too, Actionable Intelligence Alert.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. And the weekly recaps are some of my favorite videos to watch. Definitely good to kind of keep an eye on a lot of the things that you kind of talk about. So I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.